to the gentlelady from Colorado.
Gentlelady from Colorado is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's call a spade a spade. The Uniparty's deal to keep spending taxpayer dollars like drunken sailors is a horrible deal for the American people. It is immoral and unsustainable to continue the reckless spending in Washington, D.C. This debt is going to our children and our children's children. And the American people elected a majority that promised to cut spending and cut this out of control spending from Washington, D.C., and put an end to the Biden regime's policies that are destroying America. This bill does the opposite of what we, the majority, promised the American people. Voting for this bill is voting to fund Joe Biden's wide-open border policies that killed 22-year-old Lincoln Riley last Thursday. You know, crime in Venezuela sure is going down, and that's because they are all coming through our wide-open borders. Criminal, illegal aliens coming through. And voting for this bill is voting to enable the cartel who have operational control of our southern border to continue the flow of fentanyl into our communities that is killing our children and our families, our loved ones. They are a foreign terrorist organization, and they are guilty of narco-terrorism. And we need to execute our military's ability to stop them. And instead, we're funding these policies to continue. Voting for this bill is voting to continue Nancy Pelosi's spending, taxpayer-funded abortions, and Green New Deal policies. Everything we campaigned against, we won this majority on. And now we are going completely against it. We need to govern as we campaign and do what we promise the American people that we will do. That's why I have led to impeach Joe Biden for his dereliction of duty to secure the southern border. And now we must use the power of the purse and not fund a government that is allowing this against its people. I am voting no on this continuing resolution, and I urge you all to do the same. I yield back.
Reserve lady from Colorado is recognized for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On day one of his administration, Joe Biden declared an all-out war on American energy production and exploration. He has made it clear that he cares more about appeasing the radical climate change activists than protecting the millions of oil and gas workers and producers in America. I was disappointed but not surprised when the Biden administration filed this proposed rule entitled Fluid Mineral Leases and Leasing Process, which mandates provisions from the partisan so-called Inflation Reduction Act. We know that it didn't reduce inflation, it expanded it, which increased the royalty rate for production on federal lands while also increasing and creating new fees for domestic energy producers. This fluid mineral leasing rule is further proof that Joe Biden is using every tool in his administration to dismantle American energy production. It codifies pieces of the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which is really the Green New Deal, and makes major non-statutory changes to the BLM's onshore leasing program. It increases bonding levels for production on federal lands and proposes ending nationwide bonding and increasing the minimum bond amounts for individual lease bonds and statewide lease bonds from $10,000 to $150,000 and from $25,000 to $500,000, respectively. This significant increase will tie up capital that would otherwise be put back into production and is unjustifiable, as there are only 37 orphaned oil and gas wells on BLM-managed land. These increases will impact smaller producers who can't afford to operate in the market. These additional fees will ultimately harm returns and reduce revenues to state and local governments by disincentivizing development on federal lands. When environmental extremists create rules like this that are grossly restrictive, they can hinder the development and availability of energy resources that are fundamental to human progress and prosperity. It's important to remember that energy is not just another commodity. It's the lifeblood of modern civilization. Any regulation in this domain must be evaluated through the lens of its impact on human life and prosperity. This means considering not just the environmental aspects, but also how these rules affect energy affordability, reliability, and scalability. Not in my backyard extremists have regulated states like Colorado into poverty with their reckless and extremely flawed policies. The proposed rule also introduces the idea of using preference criteria to inform the BLM's selection of lands for lease sales. BLM's rationale for this change is to avoid conflict in areas with, quote, sensitive cultural, wildlife, and recreational resources, end quote. I think the people who occupy these lands most, our farmers, our ranchers, our energy producers, understand the land better than BLM agents in Washington, D.C. in some concrete building, or maybe even working remotely still from their homes. These are stewards of our lands, and they do a darn good job at it. But this means that the BLM field office could avoid leasing in all areas with endangered or threatened species, critical habitat, or nearby recreation areas, a move that would greatly limit leasing on federal lands. With the wars happening in the Middle East and in Europe, and with OPEC significantly lowering oil production, we cannot rely on foreign nations, especially our adversaries, to control our energy supply. This is why I introduced the Restoring American Energy Dominance Act to terminate this proposed rule and protect American energy producers. America makes the cleanest energy in the world. American innovation, in particular, fracking, has allowed America to be the global leader in reducing emissions since the year 2000. We need to stop buying oil and gas from Russia, stop begging Venezuela and Iran, our adversaries, to produce energy for us. We need to start producing more energy responsibly right here in the United States of America. Rather than begging OPEC, let's bring back the American roughneck. American energy security is paramount for any nation's economic stability and national security. When we produce our own energy, we control our destiny. We're not at the mercy of international politics, conflicts, or the whims of foreign governments that may not always have our best interests at heart. Remember, energy is the industry that powers every other industry. The more control we have over our energy sources, the more competitive and secure our economy is. The concept of American energy dominance is not only desirable, it's essential for both national security and global human flourishing. We could literally be exporting freedom around the globe. Relying on countries like Russia and others for energy is problematic, not just from a security standpoint, but also from a moral one. Many of these countries have questionable human rights records, to put it mildly. By producing our own energy, we're not just securing our future, we're also not indirectly supporting or enabling regimes that do not align with our values of freedom and human rights. In essence, producing energy in America is about taking control of our future, ensuring our economic stability, and standing by our principles. It's about ensuring that we can continue to innovate, grow, flourish without being beholden to anyone. And frankly, given our vast resources and technological capabilities, there's no good reason not to. I would like to thank Chairman Westerman and the committee for working with me on this bill to rein in Joe Biden's out-of-control rogue bureaucrats. I urge my colleagues to support my bill to stop BLM's proposed regulations before they increase energy costs and threaten American energy production even further. American jobs and our national security depend on us taking a stand against this regime. Mr. Speaker, I yield. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in favor of my amendment, which would prohibit federal funding for the Countering Group Extremist Activity Working or implement any recommendations from the group. In 2021, Democrats and the Biden regime unjustly used January 6th to prop up this woke working group to provide cover for unjustly targeting members of our military. The so-called Countering Group Extremist Activity Working has been weaponized and implemented to almost exclusively target Republicans, conservatives, and libertarians serving in the military. And yet, by its own metrics, it has been a massive waste of money and time. The Defense Department continues to spend large amounts of time and money to combat extremism, yet its own analysis of the situation shows that it's entirely unnecessary. In fact, fewer than 100 service members have been subject to the discipline due to engagement in extremist activities. That's only 0.005% of the approximately 2.1 million active and reserve personnel. Clearly, extremism is not the problem that my colleagues on the left and media outlets made it out to be. The United States military is tasked with one mission: maintaining mission-critical readiness to protect the American homeland. Sowing our armed forces with divisive rhetoric designed to pit races and genders against one another is not only morally wrong, it poses a very real threat to our national security. Under the Biden regime, DEI instruction and management has reached new heights that threaten to weaken the bond between America's armed forces and its civilian leadership, and undermine our military effectiveness and readiness. All of our men and women in uniform deserve to have the best tools needed to carry out their mission to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Unfortunately, liberal ideology undermines this mission. In order to stand up to China, Russia, terrorists, our military needs to project strength, not cultural wokeness. My amendment does exactly that. I urge the adoption of this amendment. Mr. Chair, I reserve.
Colorado reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Hawaii seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I claim time in opposition.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. Chair, to be clear, January 6th was an attack on America, our democracy, and this institution which we have all taken an oath to serve. This shouldn't be controversial, but service members who swear an oath to the Constitution should not try to overthrow the United States government. Yet the latest report from the Department of Defense Inspector General found that 78 service members were alleged to have advocated for the overthrow of the government in the past year alone. That is likely an undercount given reported challenges in gathering and compiling data across the military departments. Clearly, extremism in the military remains a persistent and serious issue, one that we should not take lightly, again, given the January 6th insurrection in which we know some service members and veterans participated. This fact alone should be deeply concerning to every single one of us in this chamber. Instead of taking this problem seriously, this amendment prohibits the Department of Defense from implementing recommendations designed to counter extremist activity in our military. This undermines unit cohesion, the readiness of our forces, and ultimately public trust in our military. My colleagues allege that the department's efforts to counter extremist activities unfairly targets conservatives. There's nothing in the Countering Extremist Activity Working Group's final report to substantiate that allegation, because violent extremism, regardless of its political or partisan leaning, is a danger to all of us and to this democracy. But there can be no denial that far-right extremism is surging across the country at a much higher level than that of left-wing extremism. A recent study showed that violent extremist acts in the United States were far more likely to be associated with far-right ideologies like white supremacy than for any far-left alternative. In fact, the level of violence perpetrated by right-wing extremists in this country is on par with, if not higher than, that of Islamist extremists. In our country, where service members have access to critical national security information and assets, individuals motivated by extremist ideologies can pose an outside threat to our national security when they move beyond fair and legal expression of contentious issues and into subversive or even violent actions. Tackling extremism in our military is not about promoting wokeness, which my colleagues continue to be obsessed about. It's about protecting our people and our country. And that, sadly, also means preventing domestic terrorism and addressing the serious and persistent threat to our homeland. And it's also about restoring public confidence and trust in one of the most important institutions in our history and society. I urge my colleagues to reject this dangerous amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Generally reserves. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to reiterate quickly that this is fewer than 100 service members who have been targeted here, and that's only 0.005% of the approximately 2.1 million active and reserve personnel serving. Ultimately, wokeness, it weakens our military. Violent left-wing extremists stormed the field yesterday at the congressional baseball game. And in 2020, they burned down our cities. They say that we're obsessed with wokeness. They're obsessed with January 6th, which their speaker admitted that she did not have our facility properly secured. And Mr. Chair, I would like to yield the remainder of my time to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Corey Mills.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I just want to point out once again, as a United States Army combat veteran, I had served with people from different race, creeds, genders. None of that mattered. We all bled green. When we went to Iraq, we went to Afghanistan, we were sitting in Kosovo. Not once did we talk about who did you vote for, what religion do you follow, what gender do you identify as. We were a cohesive unit that believed in service. And I think that the DEI, which was actually passed in last year's NDAA in the House, should actually show that we're ready to close this because it's caused division, not inclusion. I think that we were a much stronger military with the greater recruitment efforts when you talk about the 41,000 deficit that we're seeing today, when we were prioritizing the ideas of coming together, fighting a common enemy, training as one. This is what mattered to our United States military when we strengthened ourselves, not the ideas of trying to identify ourselves as being something different, but as being one. That's what the military that I served in, that's what the military I believe in, and we need to stop allowing our militaries to only think about serving political agendas and get back to what they're supposed to do, which is serving our country. I've seen nothing but division through DEI. And one of those examples that we talk about is that we want to try and make sure everyone has a right to their own opinions. But the reality is that Tyler Boyer had a turning point event where military members attended and were actually refused to go because of being conservatives.
Gentleman's time has expired.
We need to be a stronger military. I support this amendment. I ask our colleagues to do the same.
I yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Hawaii is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield myself as much time as is remaining.
Lady is recognized.
Thank you. As we previously heard, first of all, let's be clear here. We are not talking about DEI, which once again, this is an obsession of the far right in this particular body. And I would agree with you, though, in that same context of that conversation. I think we are in agreement. This is about how we should serve as one united nation. How do we serve as the United States of America as a whole? The bottom line is when we take a look at the kinds of extremist activity that is happening within our military that was found by the Countering Extremist Activity Working Group, this is not bringing our country together. This is not allowing us to stand under one common flag. A 2020 Military Times poll found that more than half of minority service members of color, say they have personally witnessed examples of white nationalism or ideologically driven racism within the ranks. And as we can recall, in June 2020, a service member of the 173rd Airborne Brigade with white supremacist leanings lead classified troop movements to facilitate an attack on his own unit while deployed to Turkey. Let's be clear here. The recommendations of the Countering Extremist Activity Working Group are not controversial. They include enhancing insider threat analysis and response, developing comprehensive training and education for departmental leadership, providing notice to personnel on prohibitive activities, and improving internal information sharing and coordination. I think we can all agree in this body, no matter what side of the aisle you sit on, this is good for us if we are truly trying to stand up to China, to Russia, and North Korea. How do we make ourselves truly a United States Department of Defense, not one that is currently divided by internal rifts, internal extremism that sadly we are seeing too often in the field and in our ranks. So with that, Mr. Chair, I strongly encourage all of our colleagues to vote against this amendment and to make sure that we can, in fact, be a strong, united president standing against our adversaries across the globe. I yield back.
Offered by Ms. Boebert of Colorado.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1486, gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. Boebert, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to offer my amendment that will require regional foresters to submit a plan through the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program for the treatment and removal of trees killed by or infested with bark beetles in western states. The bark beetle epidemic has caused significant damage to roughly 100,000 square miles of forest in the western United States alone. There are 600 different species of bark beetles in the United States. Several species, such as the mountain pine beetle attack, and they attack and kill live trees. Most species of bark beetles live in dead, weakened, or dying hosts. Along the West Coast and through the Rocky Mountains, bark beetles have affected tens of millions of acres of forest. While bark beetles are native to U.S. forests and play important ecological roles, they can cause extensive tree mortality and negative economic and social impacts. Spruce beetles have killed millions of trees on more than 1.8 million acres in Colorado since 2000 and provided increased fuels for wildfires. In Colorado, 2021 was one of the worst wildfire seasons our state has ever endured, with 3 largest fires in state history. Bark beetle epidemics and catastrophic wildfires are a significant threat. This can be minimized by thinning overgrown forests and removing hazardous fuels produced by beetle overpopulation. This process is sure to create jobs and increase overall forest health. I urge passage of my amendment that would prioritize collaborative forest landscape restoration program activities that address the bark beetle epidemic, a major contributor to wildfires in Colorado and the West. Mr. Chair, I reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves.
Mr. Chair, I rise to claim the time in opposition to this amendment.
Gentlewoman's recognized for 5 minutes.
This amendment was summarized by Republicans as requiring the regional foresters to develop plans for the treatment and removal of dead or dying trees due to insect disease. However, I want to clarify that this amendment actually doesn't require anything of regional foresters at all. Instead, it requires special consideration for project proposals under the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program that seek to remove or treat insects or diseases. The purpose of the Landscape Restoration Program is to encourage the collaborative, science-based ecosystem restoration of priority forest landscapes. Insect treatments are already eligible under the program and are executed often as restoration treatments. However, they are also often and should be used in tandem with other collaborative strategies as part of a broader landscape treatment plan. I urge a no vote, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves. Gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let the beetle battle begin. The beetle kill epidemic in Colorado and the western United States is a problem that we must address. I drive by these dying forests on a regular basis, and seeing the tinderbox that is created is a huge devastation. The carbon emissions that are released from a catastrophic wildfire are very harmful and impactful to my state of Colorado and the West. So I say it's time to do something about the beetle kill. And Mr. Chair, I would like to yield to the chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee, Mr. Westerman.
Gentlewoman yields. Gentleman from Arkansas is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I thank her for bringing this amendment, which is important. I support the amendment. Unfortunately, our forests out west are overstocked. They compete with each other. They get weak. They invite insect and disease infestation. These insects and diseases kill the trees, and then you have dry kindling for a lightning strike or a wildfire that gets out, and it creates the perfect storm for catastrophic wildfires. Again, I thank Representative Boebert for her efforts to improve the health of our western forest. I support the amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield.
Gentlewoman yields.
I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Colorado. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to offer my amendment that prohibits funds made available by this act to be used for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Accessibility Council at the Department of the Interior. In February of 2022, Secretary Holland established the first ever Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Council through Secretary's Order 3406 to incorporate these practices into the department's work across many bureaus. Let's be honest here. The DEI agenda is a destructive ideology that breeds hatred and racial division. It has no place in our federal government or anywhere else in our society. DEI exists to be a jobs program for otherwise unemployable holders of gender studies degrees who ruin just about everything they touch. Since taking office, the Biden-Harris regime has implemented DEI policies across virtually every agency in the federal government. The DEI is focused on coddling unequipped and incompetent employees, and I think we've seen that by all of the resignations from these DEI hires in this administration in just a few short years. As we saw a mere 11 days ago, DEI hires and incompetency at Secret Service were responsible for letting a deranged gunman come centimeters from killing President Trump. And I'm not talking about the folks who were there, boots on the ground. I'm talking about the disgraced director of the Secret Service who resigned today after scrutiny from both Republicans and Democrats, and those all throughout our country. Mr. Chair, we should no longer allow DEI and the federal government to continue to divide America and waste taxpayer money. It's absurd to fund these diverse policies, and it's time for Congress to put an end to them once and for all. The Department of Interior should be focused on restoring American energy dominance, not pandering to radical leftists. This is not about race or gender or anything else included in the DEI agenda of the left. This is about having the best, most equipped, most qualified personnel in their positions, no matter what their race or gender are. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment to abolish this demonizing DEI council. Mr. Chair, I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman is recognized. For what purpose does the gentlewoman
still from Minnesota? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wrong in the strongest opposition possible to this amendment. One of our greatest strengths as a nation is we learn, we grow, we change. And that means diversity is a great strength in this country. There was a time, Mr. Chair, when women couldn't vote. There was a time when juries were only men. There was a time when it was unthinkable for a woman to join a police department, or a woman to be a doctor. The place was to be a nurse. There was a time in our military in which women could be test pilots here at home during the war. And after the war, they were no longer allowed to be pilots in the sky flying commercially. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. The American experience is not a singular experience, and diversity programs exist to recognize this. I'm going to give another example, Mr. Chair. When I was in the state legislature in Minnesota, we had a vibrant Hmong community that came here after the Lao war in Vietnam. It was a secret war in Laos. And the Hmong community came here, and they were very outdoors people. And, understanding and making sure that they understood our natural resource laws, we decided we wanted to reach out and include that diversity. And so we went out, and I was part of legislation that was written, that we asked our Natural Resources Department to hire, to look for qualified people, hires Vietnamese, Lao, Cambodian people to work with our wonderful diverse community in the Twin Cities and have them feel included and wanted because we wanted them to experience the great outdoors in Minnesota. Well, we did that. They were well qualified, well respected, and in fact, just this year, I was surprised. One of the fathers came up to me when I was doing my recruitment and acceptance for going into the military academy. And he said, "You don't remember me, but because of you, I felt like I could do this job, and I did it well." And he retired from the state of Minnesota working for the Department of Natural Resources, and I appointed his son to go to one of our military academies. And that's the beauty of our country. And the fact is also that business leaders agree that having a diverse and inclusive workforce in the place is critical to their overall performance, because I was in sales for years. If you're selling to somebody, you better understand their culture, you better understand their needs and their wants. So the business community embraces this. So the attempt to defund or to block the implementation of these efforts only takes us back to a time when our nation's diversity, when women were not seen as an asset. So I oppose this amendment, and Mr. Chair, I'm not going to speak on this any longer. This has been replayed over and over and over again, and for me, it is hateful, it is hurtful, it is harmful. We amended our Constitution numerous times to include diversity and inclusion, and with that, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Chair, may I inquire as to how much time I have remaining?
The gentlewoman has 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. America is great, and we're going to make America even greater in the upcoming months and years. America is diverse. America is the great melting pot of the world. We have some of the world's best, the world's finest. And it's amazing. All it took were people coming together to adopt the 19th Amendment, to allow women to vote. It took people coming together and collaborating to hire women as police officers or firefighters or pilots. Heck, I've flown a plane. Little Husky 180. Great time. Enjoying the sights of Colorado and all of the mountainsides. We have an economy right now that is failing because we have a party and an administration that is prioritizing DEI, something we didn't need to have women as police officers or firefighters or pilots or service members, those who would offer up their own lives to serve in the honor of our great country, who would stand for our flag. And because of DEI and this administration's woke agenda and their radical views, we have now been regulated into poverty. I remember a time also where women could, if they chose, stay home and raise their children. And now women are forced to work and have homes with 2 incomes because they cannot afford their groceries or their gasoline to get their children to school. And it's all because of the policies of this radical agenda. I'm fine with diversity. America is known for being a welcoming country. But this DEI program isn't what makes America great, and we never needed it to be great. And I'm calling for it to come to an end. I yield.
The question is on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to offer my amendment that prohibits funds made available by this act to be used for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Accessibility Council at the Department of the Interior. In February of 2022, Secretary Garland established the first ever Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Council through Secretary's Order 3406 to incorporate these practices into the department's work across many bureaus. Let's be honest here. The DEI agenda is a destructive ideology that breeds hatred and racial division. It has no place in our federal government or anywhere else in our society. DEI exists to be a jobs program for otherwise unemployable holders of gender studies degrees who ruin just about everything they touch. Since taking office, the Biden-Harris regime has implemented DEI policies across virtually every agency in the federal government. The DEI is focused on coddling unequipped and incompetent employees, and I think we've seen that by all of the resignations from these DEI hires in this administration in just a few short years. As we saw a mere 11 days ago, DEI hires and incompetency at Secret Service were responsible for letting a deranged gunman come centimeters from killing President Trump. And I'm not talking about the folks who were there, boots on the ground. I'm talking about the disgraced director of the Secret Service who resigned today after scrutiny from both Republicans and Democrats, and those all throughout our country. Mr. Chair, we should no longer allow DEI and the federal government to continue to divide America and waste taxpayer money. It's absurd to fund these diverse policies, and it's time for Congress to put an end to them once and for all. The Department of Interior should be focused on restoring American energy dominance, not pandering to radical leftists. This is not about race or gender or anything else included in the DEI agenda of the left. This is about having the best, most equipped, most qualified personnel in their positions, no matter what their race or gender are. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment to abolish this demonizing DEI council. Mr. Chair, I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman is recognized. For what purpose does the gentlewoman
Still
seek
from
recognition?
Minnesota. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wrong in the strongest opposition possible to this amendment. One of our greatest strengths as a nation is we learn, we grow, we change. And that means diversity is a great strength in this country. There was a time, Mr. Chair, when women couldn't vote. There was a time when juries were only men. There was a time when it was unthinkable for a woman to join a police department, or a woman to be a doctor. The place was to be a nurse. There was a time in our military in which women could be test pilots here at home during the war. And after the war, they were no longer allowed to be pilots in the sky flying commercially. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. The American experience is not a singular experience, and diversity programs exist to recognize this. I'm going to give another example, Mr. Chair. When I was in the state legislature in Minnesota, we had a vibrant Hmong community that came here after the Lao a war in Vietnam. It was a secret war in Laos. And the Hmong community came here, and they were very outdoors people. And, understanding and making sure that they understood our natural resource laws, we decided we wanted to reach out and include that diversity. And so we went out, and I was part of the legislation that was written, that we asked our Natural Resources Department to hire, to look for qualified people, hires Vietnamese, Lao, Cambodian people to work with our wonderful diverse community in the Twin Cities and have them feel included and wanted because we wanted them to experience the great outdoors in Minnesota. Well, we did that. They were well qualified, well respected, and in fact, just this year, I was surprised. One of the fathers came up to me when I was doing my recruitment and acceptance for going into the military academy. And he said, "You don't remember me, but because of you, I felt like I could do this job, and I did it well." And he retired from the state of Minnesota working for the Department of Natural Resources, and I appointed his son to go to one of our military academies. And that's the beauty of our country. And the fact is also that business leaders agree that having a diverse and inclusive workforce in the place is critical to their overall performance, because I was in sales for years. If you're selling to somebody, you better understand their culture, you better understand their needs and their wants. So the business community embraces this. So the attempt to defund or to block the implementation of these efforts only takes us back to a time when our nation's diversity, when women were not seen as an asset. So I oppose this amendment, and Mr. Chair, I'm not going to speak on this any longer. This has been replayed over and over and over again, and for me, it is hateful, it is hurtful, it is harmful. We amended our Constitution numerous times to include diversity and inclusion, and with that, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Chair, may I inquire as to how much time I have remaining?
The gentlewoman has 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. America is great, and we're going to make America even greater in the upcoming months and years. America is diverse. America is the great melting pot of the world. We have some of the world's best, the world's finest. And it's amazing. All it took were people coming together to adopt the 19th Amendment, to allow women to vote. It took people coming together and collaborating to hire women as police officers or firefighters or pilots. Heck, I've flown a plane. Little Husky 180. Great time. Enjoying the sights of Colorado and all of the mountainsides. We have an economy right now that is failing because we have a party and an administration that is prioritizing DEI, something we didn't need to have women as police officers or firefighters or pilots or service members, those who would offer up their own lives to serve in the honor of our great country, who would stand for our flag. And because of DEI and this administration's woke agenda and their radical views, we have now been regulated into poverty. I remember a time also where women could, if they chose, stay home and raise their children. And now women are forced to work and have homes with 2 incomes because they cannot afford their groceries or their gasoline to get their children to school. And it's all because of the policies of this radical agenda. I'm fine with diversity. America is known for being a welcoming country. But this DEI program isn't what makes America great, and we never needed it to be great. And I'm calling for it to come to an end. I yield.
The question is on Colorado.
Rise to offer my amendment that redirects $2 million to hazardous fuels reduction activities within the Bureau of Land Management to prevent catastrophic wildfires and save lives. The year I was elected, Colorado suffered the worst fire season in Colorado history with the 3 largest recorded wildfires we have ever had. Hundreds of homes were destroyed and evacuated, and Coloradans endured more than 100 days of fire. The Cameron Peak fire burned more than 208,000 acres and more than 460 structures to the tune of $6 million in property losses. The East Troublesome fire on the border of my district killed 2 people. Coloradans also suffered severe health issues resulting from significant smoke from these fires. Wildfire smoke causes serious disorders, including eye and respiratory tract infections, reduced lung function, bronchitis, exacerbation of asthma, and even premature death. Catastrophic wildfires also cause significant damage to the environment. A few years ago, NASA concluded that one catastrophic wildfire can emit more carbon emissions in just a few days than all of the vehicle emissions in an entire state over the course of an entire year. Decades of mismanagement has left our nation's federal lands vulnerable to insects and disease and ripe for catastrophic wildfires. The good news is there is finally significant bipartisan support throughout the country to prevent wildfires, and the Forest Service is seeking to treat 20 million acres of national forests and grasslands and 30 million acres of state, local, and tribal and private lands over the next 10 years. However, we need to do more, as federal agencies have stated that more than 1 billion acres throughout the country are currently at risk of catastrophic wildfires. Our federal lands are overgrown and poorly managed, making them more susceptible to wildfire, disease, and even bark beetle attacks. There are federal lands in Colorado and the West where we once had 50 to 100 trees per acre, but now we see 500 to 1,000 trees per acre, proving the overgrowth of our forests. There are also 6 billion standing dead trees in the western United States. Some people call that a problem. I call it a tinderbox waiting to ignite and burn. Fuels, treatments are effective, and federal agencies have made clear, and I quote, over 90% of the fuel treatments are effective in changing the fire behavior and or helping with control of the wildfire, end quote. Let's put the lives of the American people first, take significant action to benefit our environment by passing my hazardous fuels reduction amendment and redirecting $2 million to these hazardous fuels reductions activities within the Bureau of Land Management, and I encourage the adoption of my amendment. Madam Chair, I reserve.
The gentlewoman from Colorado purpose does the gentlewoman from Minnesota seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I claim time in opposition to this amendment.
The gentlewoman from Minnesota is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, I'm very, very supportive of increasing funding in this important program. And I want to thank the chairman for his work over the years, hard work and bipartisan work in combating wildland fires. But I simply cannot support the offset proposed for this amendment. Funding for the EPA in the base bill is already cut $1.8 billion below the enacted level, and this reduction makes it impossible for the EPA to carry out its mission. We need the worker bees of the EPA to keep the EPA moving forward for the American public. So I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I yield back my time.
The gentlewoman from Minnesota yields back her time. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Madam Chair, I am proud of my party's work in reducing taxpayer spending by $1.8 billion in this bill. And I also am encouraged to find even more offsets where we can redirect funding and put them to a more appropriate use for the taxpayer, showing that their best interest is what we are all here serving in Washington, D.C. on their behalf for. Madam Chair, again, I support the adoption of my amendment that redirects $2 million for the fuels hazardous management in the Bureau of Land Management. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Colorado yields back.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am going to exercise the rule of the House to offer the Holman Rule amendment here in this appropriations bill. And I rise to offer my amendment that reduces the salary of Melissa Schwartz, Director of Communications of the Department of Interior, to $1. Melissa Schwartz is yet another horrendous and miserable use of taxpayer dollars. Look at this. She is a mask-wearing, quadruple-vaxxed, Green New Deal extremist, and unfortunately, a liberal troll who has harassed me even in committee hearing rooms. She shouldn't be employed at the Department of Interior. Melissa Schwartz belongs under a bridge. Melissa had the nerve and lack of respect to confront me in the halls of Congress following a Department of Interior meeting. In this hearing, she had the audacity to come and personally attack a member of Congress. This DEI hire made clear she doesn't work for the American people, and she is simply another misguided mouthpiece for liberal extremists that hates conservatives and people that disagree with her eccentric views. Rather than focus on agency priorities or the American people's priorities, facts, and seeking to do what's best for America, Schwartz spends most of her taxpayer time tweeting nonsense and trying to promote the Biden regime's radical New Deal scam. Melissa and her colleagues believe that climate change is the ultimate threat to humanity. They are willing to kill American jobs and sacrifice the health of our economy at all costs as they pursue their extremist ideology. I'm committed to taking a stand against the Biden regime's attempt to cripple American energy and cater to radical extremists. I urge my colleagues to exercise our voted on House rule and implement the Holman Rule and support my amendment that reduces the salary of Melissa Schwartz to $1. And with that, Madam Chair, I reserve.
The gentlewoman from Colorado reserves. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Maine seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I rise in opposition to this amendment.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment is petty, punitive. Rather than pursuing grudges against public servants, my colleagues across the House should focus their energy on negotiating with the Senate on a bill to fund the government. I urge my colleagues to reject this amendment, and I reserve.
The gentlewoman from Maine reserves. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Madam Chair, I yield.
The gentlewoman from Colorado yields. The gentlewoman from Maine is recognized.
I yield back.
The question is on the...
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise to offer my amendment that utilizes the Holman Rule to reduce the salary of EPA Administrator Michael Reagan to $1. On his watch, Administrator Reagan has used the EPA to impose Green New Deal policies such as electric appliance and EV mandates, power plant closures, strict regulations on American energy production, and environmental justice initiatives. On Michael Reagan's watch, the EPA has prioritized DEI over domestic energy, climate change over consumers, and EVs over our great economy. In a hearing with the Oversight and Accountability Committee, he was unaware that the EPA has never formally been authorized by Congress, something that someone who oversees an agency should know. If the body of government who is directed to create such agencies has never authorized them, well, then we kind of have a problem. But however, this hasn't stopped him from jeopardizing American energy security, overloading America's power grid, and raising costs for all American consumers and businesses. In fact, in March of last year, the EPA Twitter account posted, quote, "As a bicultural, bilingual, and bisexual woman, Iris deeply empathizes with communities at the intersection of overlapping crisis of injustice, hashtag climate change, and environmental racism," end quote. We cannot have the head of the Environmental Protection Agency claiming that even the environment is racist. This is, another season of all the questions are made up and none of the points matter. The American people want their government to work for them, not against them. This administration's Green New Deal regulations are increasing regulatory costs at a rate of $617 billion per year of rulemaking. Is that clear? $617 billion in just rulemaking alone. This isn't a bill that Congress is passing. It's just rulemaking by the agency itself. And if they continue at the Obama administration's regulatory pace, this will cost American families $60,000. It's time to put an end to governing by the Green New Deal, which is very much a scam. And the first step is to get rid of Administrator Reagan. I urge the passage of this important amendment. And with that, Madam Chair, I reserve.
The gentlewoman from Colorado reserves. Any member wish?
Madam Chairman.
What purpose did the gentleman from
claim
Idaho
time in opposition
seek
to the amendment?
Oh, Jesus. The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I see that we're going to have several Holman rules coming up. When the Holman rule was originally put in place years ago, it was meant to identify people who had committed crimes, and we've had some of those that have been fired. It wasn't meant to identify people who had policy differences. Those are what elections are about. Anybody who suggested that on this side of the aisle that we were going to elect the Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration, that the policies that they enacted were going to be things we supported, I think we're living in a different world. They're enacting their policy. Instead of doing these types of amendments, and I've opposed every one of them except one, instead of doing these types of amendments, what we need to do is, if we oppose them, get out and elect another president to get the job done. This doesn't do anything. If you could tell me that they had committed some crime, something that they didn't have the authority to do, then maybe we'd consider it. But I noticed on all of these things, there's an awful lot of Holman amendments that are going to be, and I'm only going to speak on one of them. Same message goes out for all of them. You don't do this because, frankly, I don't think we have the authority to do it, even though the rule of the House says we do. But they are appointed and they are confirmed by the United States Senate. I don't think we have, and this is essentially firing. When you reduce the salary to $1, you're firing the individual. I don't think we have that authority. So unless you can show me that they have done something illegal, high crimes or misdemeanors, something like that, I think this is silly. but we're going to have more of them. That's okay. I just wanted to speak on one of them because I don't want to repeat myself over and over and over again. But it gives the sponsors of these amendments sometimes to complain about what the administration is doing, and that's okay. But I oppose the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Idaho yields back. The gentlewoman from Colorado has 2 minutes remaining, and she's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate my colleague, Mr. Simpson here, who is chair of a subcommittee and approps the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee. I believe that we absolutely have the authority to exercise the Holman Rule. Congress, the House of Representatives, we are a majority rule self-governing body. We have rules that we vote on to put in place that allows us to govern and governs ourselves as members of Congress. We have the Holman Rule to have a check on unelected bureaucrats. I agree with my colleague that elections do matter, that we do need to get out and vote for the best candidate. However, my constituents in Colorado do not have the opportunity to vote for these unelected bureaucrats who are happy to stay in their position and wait out a majority of their disliking, and it is very difficult to remove them. And my colleague is also correct in saying this is essentially a way of firing these unelected bureaucrats who are abusing their position, who are using their power, their job and their position to hurt American citizens when they are creating rulemaking that is $17 billion per year and increasing the household costs of families by $60,000. I don't care if that's technically illegal or legal. It is immoral and it is unjust and it is unsustainable. So I stand by my amendment to reduce the salary of the EPA director, Mr. Reagan, to $1, to exercise our House rule that we have voted on, that Mr. Simpson even voted on in the rules package of January of 2023, and hold this unelected bureaucrat accountable. I am here to represent my constituents and save the American taxpayer money. Madam Chair, I yield.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to offer my amendment that utilizes the Holman Rule to reduce the salary of BLM Director Tracy Stone Manning to $1. Mr. Chair, let's call a spade a spade. Tracy Stone Manning is a terrorist, and her terrorist booby traps still threaten lives of foresters and firefighters to this very day. Tree spiking Tracy's abysmal record as BLM director has included radical anti-energy activism, engagement in eco-terrorism, failure to carry out laws, and prioritization of climate initiatives and public land grabs over domestic energy production. Tracy Stone Manning is a radicalized environmental terrorist whose repugnant philosophy includes tenets such as, quote, "We must breed fewer consuming humans," end quote. Children are, quote, "environmental hazards," end quote. Ranchers are, quote, "destroying the West," end quote. And, quote, "the solution to houses threatened by wildfires is to let them burn," end quote. Her hateful language spilled over into eco-terrorism when she became involved in a tree-spiking attack threatening the lives of wildland firefighters, foresters, and mill workers in Idaho. Stone Manning's extremist anti-government, pro-population control, anti-law enforcement, pro-wildlife, tree-worshiping, anti-farmer, and anti-responsible energy views should have been more than enough to prevent her from getting to this position. But her environmental involvement about her involvement in an eco-terrorist tree spiking attack threatening the lives of wildland firefighters, loggers, and mill workers is beyond the pale. She also perjured herself to Congress when she lied twice to the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. The first lie was that she denied ever being investigated by U.S. special agents, and the second lie was that she denied participating in tree spiking. She belongs not in the Department of Interior, but in federal prison. Mr. Chair, Tracy Stone Manning, tree spiking Manning, has got to go. And I urge the passage of this amendment as lives are still at risk for her eco-terrorism today. I reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Maine seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I rise in opposition to this amendment.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I oppose this amendment and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to offer my amendment to prohibit funding for the, ready, bicycle subsidy benefit program at the Department of the Interior. The DOI Bicycle Subsidy Benefit Program provides taxpayer dollars to DOI employees and paid student interns and/or unpaid student volunteers for the purchase, improvements, repair, storage, and/or maintenance of a non-motorized bicycle that is used as a primary means of commuting to and from work, as well as a monthly stipend. Welcome to the federal government. American taxpayers' hard-earned money is being wasted on covering bicycle commuting expenses such as bicycles, bicycle locks, bicycle parking, storage, bicycle safety equipment, bicycle improvements, or accessories including reflective lights, racks, bicycle repairs, and general maintenance, personal safety and protective equipment, including high visible safety apparel, headwear, and bicycle gloves, and bicycle share memberships, as well as getting paid to bike to work. Praise the Lord. Coloradans across my district are struggling right now. They're hurting. The economy is bad, inflation is high, the policies are ruining their lives that are brought by the Biden-Harris administration. They are struggling right now as they deal with the disastrous effects of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's destructive economic policies. We must redirect our attention and their money to much more important things than subsidizing employees for riding bicycles. The Biden administration has unleashed record inflation on Americans that has decimated our bank and retirement accounts, increased gas prices to record levels, raised utility bills, drove up grocery costs, and made it harder to live for the American people. The primary root cause of this record-breaking inflation was trillions of dollars of wasteful federal spending. This excessive spending has real-life consequences that the people I represent are experiencing every single day. American families will pay a $8,581 inflation tax over the next year. They didn't vote for that, but unfortunately, too many elected officials did. Currently, 20 million Americans cannot pay their electric bill. We have seen a 4.3% decline in real wages since Joe Biden and Kamala Harris entered the White House. Americans have lost more than $2 trillion in retirement savings they have worked their lives for. America is $35 trillion in debt, and Democrats want us to continue to print money and pay bureaucrats to bike to work when our commander-in-chief himself cannot even ride a bike. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment to cut wasteful, silly federal spending by prohibiting funding for the bicycle subsidy benefit program at the Department of the Interior. Mr. Chair, I sure do hope we can get this one through. I reserve.
Yeah, members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the president. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Minnesota seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I claim time in opposition.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
The amendment would block the Department of Interior from its bicycle subsidy benefit program, which encourages federal employees to use bicycles to commute to the office. And we all know what the traffic's going to be like here tomorrow. Bikes would be handy. The department created this program in response to a 1993, this is not a new President Biden, Vice President Harris program, 1993. It's been around since 1993. And Congress authorized it. And Congress allowed each agency head to establish a program to encourage employees to use the means other than single occupancy motor vehicles to commute to and from work. So that could include taking the subway, taking the bus, or riding your bike. This is a government-wide program, and blocking the amendment unfairly targets the Interior Department employees. So I urge my colleagues to treat all employees with fairness. And let's reject this amendment, and let's also make sure that when we're talking about it, we have our facts accurate. 1993, Congress made a law which authorized each agency to establish this program. And with that, I yield back.
Reserves. The yield's back.
Now
Gentlewoman from Colorado.
Mr. Chair, I yield.
Reserve, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from Florida.
I yield 2 minutes of my time to the gentlewoman from Colorado, Representative Boebert.
Gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my friend Ana Paulina Luna, the representative from Florida, leading this important resolution. I just have one question. What is the Biden administration trying to hide? Attorney General Merrick Garland's refusal to produce evidence establishes a clear pattern of obstruction by the Department of Justice, or rather injustice during this administration, to cover up Joe Biden's wrongdoings. Joe Biden has lied to the American people about his mishandling of classified documents. Never mind the stories about his uncle being eaten by cannibals. We're not touching that today, but he has also repeatedly denied knowing about or being involved in his family's influence peddling schemes, which the Oversight Committee can now show has raked in $18 million from foreign individuals and entities for Biden family members, including Joe Biden himself. And after the debate, it has grown increasingly apparent that Joe Biden has repeatedly made false statements to the American people about his ability to even lead this country.
Seconds, Representative.
Gentleman's recognized. Members are reminded to refrain from engaging personalities toward the president or presidential candidates.
Enough is enough.
Recognized.
Biden's Department of Justice has taken every step to insulate him from any consequences, whether it's hiding these audio recordings or attempting to give Hunter Biden a sweetheart deal. This is absolutely unacceptable. The House of Representatives cannot serve as a necessary check on the presidency if the executive branch is free to ignore the House's subpoenas. It is clear the Biden crime family believes they are above the law, and I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this important resolution and force Biden's crooked DOJ to hand over the tapes and hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in inherent contempt of Congress.
Mr. Speaker,
To offer the amendment on behalf of my friend from Montana, Representative Zinke, which will improve the effectiveness of the Good Neighbor Authority. The Good Neighbor Authority program enables cross-boundary forest management activities with states, tribes, and counties. Collaborative tools like this program are critical to confronting the wildfire crisis, as raging wildfires don't respect man-made borders that separate forests into different jurisdictions. Since 2014, over 490 Good Neighbor Authority projects have been started in 34 states, and more than 273 million board feet of timber is sold yearly through this program. Currently, funds from the sale of timber from Good Neighbor projects can be used to treat insect and disease-infested trees, reduce hazardous fuels, improve forest health, and restore and repair decommissioned Forest Service roads necessary to implement restoration activities. This amendment would expand the permissible users of timber receipts derived from Good Neighbor Authority projects to include the reconstruction, repair, and restoration of roads on non-Forest Service land when such activities are needed to implement forest management projects on federal land. New road construction on federal lands would also be permitted use under this amendment to facilitate authorized restoration projects. However, these new road projects would still be required to comply with the applicable environmental review processes. Further, this amendment would allow timber receipts to be used to construct new roads to replace existing roads that adversely impact forest, rangeland, and watershed health. Access to areas urgently needing treatment remains a huge challenge to improving forest health. Roads are beneficial for forest management, provide the public with access to outdoor recreation opportunities, and enable safer and more effective wildland firefighting. This thoughtful amendment from Representative Zinke will improve forest management activities under Good Neighbor Authority by empowering partners to overcome some of the access challenges preventing badly needed work in our forests. I thank Representative Zinke for his leadership on this issue. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. Mr. Chair, I reserve.
The gentlelady reserves. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I rise to claim time in opposition to this amendment.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
This amendment would permit the use of Good Neighbor Authority revenues for the construction of new roads. Currently, the Forest Service manages 372,000 miles of roads across 193 million acres that they manage. Due to such a large inventory, the Forest Service often faces financial difficulties in operation and maintenance. Over half, over 58% of the Forest Service's $7.66 billion of deferred maintenance is related to roads. The Forest Service has a colossal network of roads that is already far too big for them to maintain. For this reason, it is hard to support an amendment that would allow the construction of even more roads, that doesn't provide any resources for the future maintenance of those new Forest Service roads. Our Forest Service is spread dangerously thin due to Republican budget cuts. This amendment would make the problem even worse. I urge a no vote and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady from California reserves. The gentlelady from Colorado is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I would like to yield to the gentleman from Arkansas.
The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized.
Thank the gentlelady from yielding. This is a good amendment that allows good use of our resources, and it allows tribes and local communities to take care of the roads that are necessary to access and be able to do these forest management projects, and also to be able to fight fires when they break out and to stop them before they get too big. I support the amendment and I yield back.
The gentleman from Arkansas yields back. The gentlelady from Colorado is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I yield.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
I yield.
The gentlelady from California yields. The question is on the amendment.
House Resolution 1370, the gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. Boebert. Any member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to offer my amendment that utilizes the Holman Rule to reduce the salary of Secretary Deb Haaland to $1. Under Haaland's leadership, the Department of the Interior has shut down pipelines, delayed federally mandated onshore and offshore leases, repealed common sense streamlining regulations, shuttered mining projects, failed to comply with numerous laws, and so much more. She also has quite a history of conflicts of interest. Under Holland's leadership, DOI has cultivated close and potentially improper relationships with extreme environmental activist groups, many of whom are working overtime to drive the Biden-Harris administration's social and environmental justice agenda. Her daughter is a member of the Pueblo Action Alliance, which opposes all oil and gas production on federal lands, advocates for the dismantling of America's economic and political system, and believes America is irredeemable because there is no, quote, opportunity to reform a system that isn't founded on good morals or values, end quote. Holland's daughter even engaged in a violent protest with 100 or more protesters breaking through police barriers and trying to get into the Department of the Interior's building. She just want to hug her mom? Or was this a real act of violence with intent? Despite multiple attempts from this institution to do its constitutional duty and provide congressional oversight, the Department of the Interior has failed to respond to 80% of the requests from Congress. I would be remiss to not mention Holland's all-out war on American energy production, from canceling the Keystone XL pipeline on day one, imposing new rules to block pipeline projects, canceling oil and gas leases on millions of acres in Alaska and the Gulf of Mexico, suspending oil drilling leases in a small sliver of ANWR, even though Congress passed a law for this very purpose, imposing a moratorium on new federal oil and gas leases through federal lands, failing to meet the statutory deadlines for quarterly lease sales, and taking countless of other anti-energy measures that have contributed to gas prices and inflation reaching record levels. We need to make America energy dominant once and for all. It's time for us to have energy security, and it's clear that it won't happen with Holland leading the Department of Interior. Mr. Chair, I urge the adoption of this important amendment, and I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Maine seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I rise in opposition to this amendment.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I oppose this amendment, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. Gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I yield.
Gentlewoman yields. The question on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Colorado. Those in favor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to Chairman Biggs for leading on this issue. I rise in support of the Equal Representation Act, which will add a citizenship question to the census and exclude illegal aliens from the apportionment base. It is past time we put America and Americans first. Joe Biden and his regime are shelling out benefits to illegal immigrants like Oprah Winfrey on her show. Everyone gets a vote. Everyone gets recognized, even if you're here illegally. In New York, aliens are receiving $53 million in free prepaid debit cards. In Denver, Colorado, aliens get 6 free months of housing. And now they want to hand them seats in Congress to buy their lifelong allegiance to the Democrat Party. Since Biden took office, we have seen more than 9 million illegal aliens cross our borders, and more than 1.8 million gotaways evade Border Patrol agents. That is larger than the population of 32 states, Mr. Speaker. There are now at least 16.8 million illegal aliens living in the United States, enough to account for roughly 22 seats in the House of Representatives. Including these aliens in the apportionment of congressional districts impacts representation in Congress and undermines the constitutional principle of one person, one vote. Americans deserve to have their voices fully represented, not diluted by illegal aliens. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this legislation, and I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this bill. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk on block. Or do you just want me to speak on it? Sorry, I was going to offer it a different way.
The gentlewoman
address
is recognized to
the
speak
chair?
on the amendments on block.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in favor of my amendment, which prohibits the Department of Defense from contracting with entities that are engaged in a boycott of the State of Israel. Last October, Israel faced an unprecedented attack by Hamas. Since then, they have been fighting for their very right to exist against a terrorist group that has committed brutal and horrific war crimes. Hamas is responsible for slaughtering babies, using children as human shields, raping Israeli women, executing parents in front of their children, and children in front of their parents. These brutal acts of terror are often praised by my colleagues on the left. This is disgusting, and it is absolutely wrong. I believe in standing with our allies. America's closest ally is Israel, and I have stood with them through countless attacks from the radical left. The boycott, divest, and sanction movement promotes anti-Israel and anti-Semitic sentiments around the world, and U.S. tax dollars should not be supporting entities that advocate for this disgusting practice. The BDS movement is anti-Semitic. It is an anti-Semitic cancer, even, that has spread throughout our college campuses and has been promoted by the Hamas caucus on the left. Anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. reached a record high in the last year. The Anti-Defamation League tracked 8,873 anti-Semitic incidents in the United States in 2023, the highest number of incidents reported since the organization began tracking data in 1979. Our Department of Defense should not be contracting with anti-Semitic entities or encouraging their behavior.
Time has expired.
I yield.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1370, the gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. Boebert, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From day one of this regime, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris declared an all-out war on American energy production and exploration. They have made very clear that they care more about appeasing the radical climate change activists than protecting the millions of oil and gas workers and producers in America. I was disappointed but not surprised when the Biden regime finalized the rule entitled Fluid Mineral Lease and Leasing Process, which mandates provisions from the partisan so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which increased the royalty rate for production on federal lands while also increasing and creating new fees for domestic energy producers. This new fluid mineral leasing rule is further proof that the Biden-Harris regime is using every tool in their administration to dismantle American energy production. It increases bonding levels for production on federal lands and proposes ending nationwide bonding and increasing the minimum bond amounts for individual lease bonds and statewide lease bonds from $10,000 to $150,000 and from $25,000 to $500,000, respectively. This significant increase will tie up capital that would otherwise be put back into production and is unjustifiable, as there are only 37 orphaned oil and gas wells on BLM-managed lands. These increases will impact smaller producers who can't afford to operate in the market. These additional fees will ultimately harm returns and reduce revenues to state and local governments by disincentivizing development on federal lands. The rule also introduces the idea of using preference criteria to inform the BLM selection of lands for lease sales. BLM's rationale for this change is to avoid conflict in areas, quote, with sensitive cultural, wildlife, and recreation resources, end quote. This means that BLM field offices could avoid leasing in all areas with endangered or threatened species, critical habitat, or nearby recreation areas, a move that would greatly limit leasing on our federal lands. With the wars happening in the Middle East and in Europe, and with OPEC significantly lowering oil production, we cannot rely on other foreign nations to control our energy supply. America makes the cleanest energy in the world. We do it the most responsibly. American innovation, in particular fracking, has allowed America to be the global leader in reducing emissions since the year 2000. We need to stop buying oil and gas from Russia, stop begging OPEC, Venezuela, and Iran to produce energy for us, and start producing more energy responsibly here in America. I am ready to bring back the American roughneck and to drill, baby, drill, because no one does it better than we do here in the United States of America. We must restore American energy dominance and produce clean, reliable energy right here in America. Mr. Chair, I urge the adoption of my amendment, and I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves.
Mr. Chair, I claim time in opposition to this amendment.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
And first and foremost, I do not believe that the United States government purchases oil from Russia. We have sanctions against them, and we do not purchase oil from Iran. Mr. Chair, this amendment is one more controversial poison pill writer that sadly shows the extremist Republicans are not interested in bills that can gain bipartisan support and become law. The Fluid Mineral Lease and Leasing Program rules revises outdated. These haven't been updated for years, and it's our responsibility to make sure the taxpayers get a good return on our natural resources when they're put out to lease. So what this tries to do is just update these outdated fiscal terms on offshore leases, oil, gas program, including bonding requirements to protect taxpayers, royalty rates, and minimum bids to make sure that U.S. taxpayers receive a fair amount for their public lands when they're used as lease materials. The rule aims to increase the returns to the American taxpayers. I can't say this enough. It's to make sure that taxpayers are getting a fair shake, that they're assured of a fair return from the extraction of natural resources on public lands, and to discourage speculators and improve responsible stewardship as directed by Congress. Now, we're here to protect the cultural and natural resources of our public lands for future generations. And that means when they go out to bid, that we make sure that the royalty rates and the minimum bids serve the taxpayers well, and bonding requirements to protect taxpayers are put in place. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I would like to yield the remainder of my time to my colleague, Mr. Simpson from Idaho.
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank the lady for yielding. I rise in support of the amendment. This administration continues to put out rulemakings that seek to attack American energy producers with burdensome costs and regulations. These new costs will ultimately be passed along to consumers, driving up energy costs for American families and further shifting production to countries that are not our friends. We must utilize an all-of-the-above energy approach to energy production and stop hampering domestic energy production. It would be interesting to note that in the year 2020, we were actually energy independent in this country. We are no longer. And yet we have the energy here in this country, but we refuse to use it. Therefore, I support the gentlewoman's amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlelady is recognized.
I would like to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves.
Mr. Chair, I yield.
Mr. Chair, I want to state another fact for the record. When we extract oil and natural gas out of public lands, it's sold on a global market. So when it's sold to other folks. So if we're running into energy independence challenges, as was pointed out, part of that's because it's sold on the global market. I also want to point out for the record, it's been almost 4 decades, since the taxpayers have had bonding requirements, royalty rates, and minimum bids looked at to make sure that they're protected. Let me close with this. Once again, my Republican colleagues are disregarding the law and trying to circumvent rigorous practices to put the rules up to date and nullify public comments also happens with this amendment. We just can't close our eyes to the impacts of climate change that we're experiencing as our country, our health, our livelihoods, food security, and quality of life all depend upon a healthy ecosystem. And I urge my colleagues to reject this amendment and focus instead on addressing climate change and being good stewards of our public lands and resources for the benefits of future generations. And that means refreshing and updating almost 40-year-old oil, gas, and mineral leasing. With that, I yield back.
The question is on.
I'd like to yield 5 minutes to the gentlewoman from Colorado, the sponsor of the legislation, Ms. Boebert.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I too stand here today celebrating the success story of the Endangered Species Act, seeing that the gray wolf has been fully recovered. I also stand today, Mr. Speaker, in defense of our farmers and our ranchers, just like the Farrell family in Grand County, Colorado, who has lost up to 5 of their cattle in a 10-day span in Colorado from wolves attacking their ranch in Grand County. In my home state of Colorado, out-of-touch Denver and Boulder leftists voted to reintroduce gray wolves. Since then, 10 wolves were reintroduced in December, and 8 have confirmed wolf livestock depredations and 6 separate incidents involving wolf attacks in Colorado just this month. My Trust the Science Act delists the gray wolf from the federal endangered species lists and returns the issue of the wolf management to states and tribal wildlife agencies. Again, a success story that we should be celebrating here today. Specifically, my bill requires the Secretary of Interior to reissue the 2022 Department of Interior final rule that delisted gray wolves in the lower 48 United States and ensures that the reassurance of the final rule will not be subject to judicial review. Gray wolves were first listed under the Endangered Species Preservation Act in 1967. That's 57 years ago. In 2009, the Obama administration upheld the decision to delist gray wolves when their Interior Secretary, Ken Salazar, a Democrat from Colorado, announced the decision at a press conference that the Fish and Wildlife Service decision to delist gray wolves was a, quote, a supportable one. Scientists have concluded that recovery has occurred, end quote. In 2011, Congress directed USFWS to reinstate a rule to delist the gray wolf in the northern Rockies ecosystem. In 2013, the Obama administration proposed delisting gray wolves in the lower 48 states. In November of 2020, scientists and nonpartisan career employees at the Department of Interior once again found gray wolves were fully recovered and once again issued a rule that returned management of gray wolf populations to state and tribal wildlife agencies. Unfortunately, frivolous litigation was filed by the Defenders of Wildlife, Wild Earth Guardians, and other extremist groups, and an activist California judge subsequently pandered to these groups by vacating the 2020 rule and ultimately relisting the gray wolf by judicial fiat. In April of 2022, the Biden administration appealed the ruling of this California activist judge and supported the 2020 rule that delisted gray wolves in the lower 48 United States. In February of this year, the Biden administration announced a not warranted finding for 2 frivolous petitions that tried to list gray wolves under the ESA in the northern Rocky Mountains and in the western United States. In the 115th Congress, the House of Representatives passed similar legislation to my bill by a vote of 196 to 180, with 9 Democrats voting in favor of passage. State and tribal wildlife agencies have a proven record of successfully managing gray wolves. In fact, Montana's successful state management resulted in gray wolves being 500% above Fish and Wildlife Service recovery goals. Idaho's successful state management resulted in gray wolves being 700% above recovery goals. There are now, as estimated, up to 6,000 wolves in the lower 48. Furthermore, there are an estimated 7,000 to 11,000 gray wolves in Alaska, and there are an estimated 30,000 gray wolves in Canada. Again, an endangered species list success story. Let's do as my bill says, trust the bipartisan science, and pass this bill so we can finally delist the fully recovered gray wolf and focus scarce taxpayer funding on endangered species that actually need help being recovered. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield.
The gentlewoman yields.
I reserve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise to offer my common sense amendment that redirects $2 million of the Inspector General to combat waste, fraud, and abuse within the EPA. As a proud member of the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability, I am a firm believer in increasing transparency of federal programs and actions within the executive branch. Honest, hardworking Americans should be able to trust that their tax dollars are being spent responsibly and for their intended purposes. The EPA Office of Inspector General is charged with providing critical oversight over tens of billions of dollars that are spent by the EPA, U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board, as well as more than $100 billion that is being doled out through the so-called Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the so-called Inflation Reduction Act that we all know did nothing to reduce inflation. Ask anyone you meet in a grocery store. Unlike other Inspector General offices, the EPA IG did not receive additional funding from the Inflation Reduction Act, Expansion Act, to carry out the additional oversight mandates associated with this law. Oversight by the IG is critical to ensure that the EPA, as well as its grantees and contractors, are responsible stewards of scarce American tax dollars. The IG also seeks to root out fraud, waste, and abuse, mismanagement, and misconduct within the agencies it provides oversight to. Recently, the IG identified significant taxpayer risks and vulnerabilities that are associated with the administration's Clean School Bus program. Sounds great, right? The Inspector General pointed out, and I quote, "There is a high potential for, among other things, falsely substituting or duplicating requests from multiple federal agencies for the same or very similar materials and associated labor," end quote. Ever since the passage of the Inspector General Act in 1978, Inspectors General has uncovered billions of dollars of fraud and exposed numerous instances of criminal wrongdoing. The EPA IG is no exception. During the first half of the fiscal year of 2023, the EPA IG identified $135 million in wasted spending, fraud avoidance, and other monetary benefits to American taxpayers. However, vigilance by the EPA Inspector General is needed now more than ever for the more than $100 billion of Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act that have been distributed and are still going out the door. Funding currently allocated in this bill for the EPA IG is significantly below the budget estimate, yet they are being asked to do significantly more. My common sense amendment will help ensure that the Inspector General has the funding and resources they need to provide strict oversight of the EPA. I have found a pay for, so this is not deficit spending. We are not wasting taxpayer dollars. We are redirecting these $2 million. And I urge my colleagues to support my amendment to redirect important resources to the Inspector General. Madam Chair, without a reserve.
The gentlewoman from Colorado reserves. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Minnesota seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I claim time in opposition to this amendment.
The gentlewoman from Minnesota is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, to be clear, I fully support the oversight efforts and believe in the mission of the Inspector General's office across this government. It's vital. When I was former chair of this committee, I supported their work. I supported their work as the former chair of the Defense Subcommittee and as ranking member. But I have to strongly disagree with the offset and the treatment of the EPA in this bill in general. In base bill, the EPA is cut by nearly 20%. Almost every single account is cut except for the Office of the Inspector General. So quite frankly, the Inspector General's office does pretty well under this bill being protected. Cutting every single program at the EPA and seeking to increase funding for only one office, which happens to be the Oversight Office, is clearly an attempt by the majority to politicize the Inspector General, and that to me is just unacceptable, Madam Chair. So I oppose the amendment, and before I reserve the balance of my time, I require how much time is left, if I could ask that of you.
The gentlewoman has 4 minutes remaining.
And the gentlewoman offering the amendment?
Gentlewoman from Colorado has 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman from Minnesota reserves. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Yes, Madam Chair, I would like to yield the remainder of my time to my colleague, Mr. Simpson.
The gentleman from Idaho is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for yielding. I rise in support of this amendment to provide additional funding for the EPA Office of Inspector General to conduct important and necessary oversight agencies. I've spoken with several of the Inspector Generals that have said that with all of the funding that went out last year, funding that went out to the EPA and to other things, they don't have enough money to do the oversight to make sure that the money that was spent in the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill, and other things are properly spent. And so that they've asked us, actually, and several of my colleagues on this side of the aisle, Mrs. Boebert and Mrs. Bice, have also suggested that we need more money in the Inspector General's accounts. So I'm supporting this amendment, and I hope my colleagues will also.
Say that again. The gentlewoman from Colorado yield back.
I yield.
The gentlewoman from Minnesota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I appreciate Chairman Simpson's remarks, but I would like to correct a point that was made earlier in the debate. The bill already does include a provision to provide the IG, with a percentage of funds from the IRA. And it's on page 216 is section 471. So the gentlewoman might want to double check before making such a broad statement again that it didn't include any funding that could be used from the IRA. So I still oppose the amendment. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to offer my amendment that prohibits the Bureau of Land Management from taking any action to finalize, implement, or enforce a draft resource management plan and draft supplemental environmental impact statement to end new oil leases on 1.6 million acres in Colorado. Colorado's West Slope used to have a booming energy production economy. I remember because the Roughnecks used to come into my restaurant. They would patronize my business and businesses all around us. And I knew we were having a really good day by the amount of mud we had to clean up off of the floor from their boots after working hard all day in the field to earn a living for their family and produce good, clean energy for us, not just in Colorado and America, but throughout the world. There used to be 112 drilling rigs on the West Slope, but now we have 4 rigs. Now, not in my backyard extremists and job-killing federal policies have driven away those good-paying jobs. Those good-paying jobs that also supported local businesses. The Bureau of Land Management's draft resource management plan for the Colorado River Valley Field Office and Grand Junction Field Office is the latest fossil fuels attack. This proposed land grab could remove over 1.6 million acres of public lands in Colorado from future oil and gas leasing and establish 9 different areas of critical environment concern on over 100,000 acres of BLM land. If this proposal is finalized, the United States will lose access to vital energy resources, many more than the 600 fewer wells projected by the agency to be lost by 2043. The consequences will be felt far beyond the state of Colorado, where residents will lose their livelihoods and see increased gas and energy prices, yes, even more than the increases we are seeing today. BLM is proposing to close all areas with no known low and moderate oil and gas development potential and is basing its analysis off the oil and gas potential on out-of-date information that does not take into consideration modern technology. The Permian Basin was once thought to be low to medium, and now it's the highest producing oil field in the world. As a result, the Permian Basin would be closed if this proposal had been in place in New Mexico and Texas prior to the significant amount of production that is now occurring. This proposed land grab is nothing short of partisan politics meant to further restrict access to the oil and natural gas development that could reinvigorate the economy of the West Slope of Colorado and help ensure energy security for all Americans. There are already stringent standards and requirements in place for oil and gas producers that aim at reducing environmental and cultural impacts. This proposed rule is yet another blatant land grab disguised to dismantle the fossil fuel industry and force a green transition, closing the door to over 1.6 million acres of vital public lands for energy development is not just an issue of economics, it's a threat to our nation's energy independence and security. This proposal goes beyond necessary environmental considerations and instead seeks to restrict access to promising resources, hindering the potential of economic growth and prosperity, particularly in the West Slope of Colorado, where we have been regulated into poverty thanks to the Biden-Harris administration. Rogue bureaucrats at the BLM shouldn't be unilaterally locking up more land in Colorado. It's urgent that we block this overreach and prioritize responsible energy production that will help reduce gas prices during these challenging times. Mr. Chair, I yield. I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. Does any member seek time in opposition? For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Maine seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I claim time in opposition to this amendment. This amendment is one more controversial poison pill policy that sadly shows that extremist Republicans are not interested in bills that can gain bipartisan support and become law. In accordance with the National Environmental Policy Act and the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976, the BLM drafted the proposed draft resource management plan and draft supplemental environmental impact statement for the Colorado River Valley Field Office and Grand Junction Field Office. This plan is an updated, comprehensive, an environmentally advocate framework for managing uses of these public lands and resources. Sadly, this amendment seeks to block that plan. We are here to protect the welfare of the American public and preserve our public lands and resources for future generations. Once again, my Republican colleagues are disregarding the law and trying to circumvent the rigorous process that is in place to update resource management plans. The amendment also nullifies the public comments that have been collected by legislating the outcome. We cannot close our eyes to the impacts of climate change we are experiencing as our economy, health, livelihoods, food security, and quality of life all depend on healthy ecosystems. I urge my colleagues to reject this amendment, focus instead on addressing climate change and being good stewards of our public lands and resources for the benefit of future generations. I reserve my time.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Mr. Chair, on behalf of Coloradans, I'm here to say end the land grabs, bring back the American roughneck, and drill, baby, drill. I urge the adoption of my amendment, and I yield.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentlewoman from Maine is recognized.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say one thing about my colleague's amendment. She's making the case for the fact that we have to continue to drill for oil or natural gas in Colorado. And I understand the concerns that people have when the economy changes. I can imagine how difficult it is when people have to look at new opportunities as opposed to continuing the careers that they've always done. But the reason we're here addressing this, the reason any changes would be made at a federal level are because we're facing catastrophic climate change. The scientists have told us we have no time left to reduce our dependence on fossil fuel, and yet my colleague is talking about how we have to bring more fossil fuels back into our energy stream. We've made incredible strides with solar power, wind power, all of the renewable energy we're investing in today. She talks about her role to protect Colorado. Well, my role is to protect the state of Maine. I invite you to come and visit anytime. The ocean in Maine is warming at a rate 99% faster than the oceans around the world. I talked to a fisherman this weekend when I was home, and I asked him how fishing was going this summer as the weather has warmed up, as the ocean has warmed up. And we're seeing a serious depletion in the fishing stocks. They can't survive in warmer waters. They migrate to colder waters. They devastate the economy of our fishermen. So if you want to preserve the economy in your state, it's important that you think about renewable energy and ways to make sure that we can support an energy future that works for all of us, not just for your own state's needs. I yield back my time.
The gentlewoman yields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to offer my amendment to prohibit funds from being used for the EPA's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. The Inflation Reduction Act, which should have been more accurately named the Green New Deal in disguise, established a taxpayer-funded $27 billion slush fund that sends taxpayer dollars to far-left political organizations and their favorite, the Chinese Communist Party. This green bank is nearly 3 times more than the EPA's entire FY23 appropriated funds. Eliminating this slush fund will reduce the budget deficit, protect the government against corruption, and stop China from receiving our taxpayer dollars. When asked during a committee hearing if the EPA could guarantee that none of the funds from this green bank slush fund would go to China, the EPA official in charge of overseeing how funds were spent literally stated, quote, "It's a little more complicated," end quote. He didn't say yes or no. It's a little more complicated. Over 20 million Americans are currently behind on their utility bills. The American people are not begging for more electric vehicles or solar panels. They are asking for lower energy costs. In fact, the world is demanding it of us because we could literally export freedom to our allies across the globe if we were to export our liquefied natural gas rather than purchase energy from our enemies. If Democrats wanted to do something about the current energy crisis, rather than pandering to radical environmental extremists, they would unleash American energy instead of forcing us to use inadequate and unreliable green energy. These policies will not only fail to meet our economy's energy needs, but they will also make America reliant on wind turbines and solar panels that are made in China. America is an energy superpower. We should use our vast resources to restore our economy's vitality, ensure our national security, and put hardworking Americans back to work. I urge the passage of my common sense amendment to put an end to the Biden-Harris regime's pandering to the CCP. And Mr. Chair, I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Maine seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I claim time in opposition to this amendment.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment, again, is purely an anti-climate messaging amendment. It prohibits funds for Section 134 of the Clean Air Act, which is better known as the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is a $27 billion investment to mobilize financing and private capital to address the climate crisis, ensure our country's economic competitiveness, and promote energy independence. I need to note that all $27 billion of those dollars are mandatory spending. This bill does not contain any funding for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. So the effort or the effect of this amendment is nothing more than anti-climate rhetoric. We are here to protect the welfare of the American public, and we cannot close our eyes to the impact of climate change. We need to make smart investments that will result in more resilient communities, mitigate the impacts of climate change, and protect our world for future generations. I oppose this amendment, and I reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves. Gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I yield.
Gentlewoman from Colorado yields.
Yield back.
Gentlewoman from Maine yields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to offer my amendment that prohibits made available by this act from funds made available by this act from being used to declare a national monument with the use of the Antiquities Act in Montrose, Mesa, Montezuma, San Juan, and Dolores counties in western Colorado. Green New Scam extremists in Colorado have been petitioning Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to use the Antiquities Act to designate a roughly 400,000-acre Dolores River Canyon County National Monument. The proposed designation of the Dolores River as a national monument threatens to impose severe economic hardships on the communities in western Colorado. This unilateral land grab will cancel all mining in the uranium-rich area, end hunting and cattle grazing, and curtail motorized travel. These are practices that have been part of the Western way of life for generations. The Biden-Harris regime is no stranger to abusing the Antiquities Act. A little over a year ago, they locked up over 225,000 acres in Colorado with the stroke of a pen and prevented Colorados from using our public lands for activities that we want and need. This is a right of Coloradans and Americans, just taken away. Taking even more federal lands off the table for multiple use is attacking American energy production, American jobs, American workers, and leaving American consumers to pay the tab. This amendment ensures Joe Biden and Kamala Harris cannot lock up land by executive fiat and encourages the administration to look for stakeholder-supportive solutions like my bipartisan, bicameral Dolores River National Conservation Area and Special Management Act. This is something I worked with my Colorado senators on. We found a way to compromise without compromising our principles. We came to a place of agreement. The Dolores NCA seeks to designate the Dolores River Corridor for the best preservation, benefit, and access of the majority. It is the result of over a decade of community engagement between rafters, agriculture producers, outdoor enthusiasts, water rights stakeholders, conservationists, miners, loggers, business owners, and all the impacted local governments and tribes. Disregarding the agreements achieved and the significant time invested in the Dolores NCA would be an absolute insult to citizens of Southwest Colorado and would contradict DOI's own description of the Antiquities Act, which states, quote, the administration consistently strives to take into account the interests of these wide-range stakeholders, end quote. This proposed national monument designation has the potential to restrict access and land use in ways that threaten and subvert the will of the people in Colorado. I have constituents on the ground daily fighting this proposal, and I am here on their behalf to bring an end to it once and for all through the position that they've elected me to, and I urge adoption of my amendment. Mr. Chair, I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Maine seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I claim time in opposition to this amendment.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment would prohibit the use of any federal funds to create national monuments under the Antiquities Act of 1906 in Montrose County, Mesa County, Montezuma County, San Juan County, or Dolores County in Colorado. The Antiquities Act provides the President with the authority to designate national monuments in order to protect objects of historic or scientific interest. This amendment inappropriately restricts the President's ability to declare national monuments in specific parts of the country. Both Republican and Democratic presidents have used this authority to increase the protection of special federal lands. It goes against 100 years of American tradition to protect the nation's cultural and national resources. The Antiquities Act represents an important achievement in the progress of conservation and preservation efforts in the United States, and Congress should not stand in the way of these achievements. I urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment, and I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. Gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Mr. Chair, the gentlewoman from Maine recently said that it is her priority to focus on Maine and I should focus on Colorado. Well, here we are with an amendment related to my home state of Colorado, and I'm here to protect my constituents and our land from another land grab from the Biden-Harris administration. The gentlewoman from Maine has complained of concerns that she has with so-called climate changes and warming of the water, and if that is the main concern, then perhaps the gentlewoman from Maine would like to partner with me from ending energy production in China, who has the worst regulations and emits the most emissions of any place in the world, and stop buying solar panels from China, where they're using child and slave labor in mines in the Congo, and work to partner with me for better American energy production. It's more reliable, it's more efficient, it's cleaner, we're creating jobs, and in the meantime, I'll stick right here to Colorado with this amendment, and the gentlewoman from Maine can focus on Maine as she said she would prefer to do. Mr. Chair, I urge the adoption of my amendment, and I yield.
The gentlewoman yields. Gentlewoman from Maine is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just reiterate once again, climate change is a serious issue. It's something to debate with facts and actual information, not just sort of speculation or things you hear on the internet. One of the reasons we passed the Inflation Reduction Act is to bring some of the manufacturing for renewable energy back into the United States, and I strongly support that. I support all countries making a serious effort to reduce their investment in fossil fuel, their dependence on fossil fuel. That's what we were debating in the last amendment. This is about national monuments, and again, I will reiterate that national monuments and the designation of them has been an important tool for presidents of both parties, and we should not be doing anything that diminishes that opportunities for an administration. I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back.